Very happy to have you back here on the Common Law. We're talking with Pat Iyer, who is the president of MedLeague Support Services. And our subject is medical records, life and death in an injury lawsuit. And Pat is a legal nurse consultant. We're talking about medical records. Again, thank you so much, Pat, for being here with us. Let's ask a basic question, and that is, what is the purpose? Why are medical records kept by doctors, by healthcare facilities, and so forth?
Well, it's a professional responsibility to show that the appropriate medical care was rendered. It's also necessary for reimbursement purposes.
Can an individual, at their own whim or wish, without any other particular reason, can they obtain their own medical records?
They can. The medical record, the physical pieces of paper belong to the doctor or the hospital, but the information in those records belongs to the patient. The medical record has to be completed within 30 days after a patient's discharged from the hospital. So the hospital does have 30 days to get all the paperwork done, such as getting the discharge summary dictated and on the medical record. But a patient has the right to sit down with the doctor or even while in the hospital and have people explain the records to that patient if that person has questions.
Is there some procedure in which they have to follow to obtain their own medical records, or do they say to the doc, by the way, I think I'll take a couple of copies of those if we have an X-ray machine, a Xerox machine or whatever? How do they generally get a hold of their medical records?
They usually put a request in writing, and then the physician often has the right to charge a duplicating fee for those records, but they can be obtained.
Is that the same procedure, for example, in a nursing home?
In a nursing home, there is a time frame that the medical record has to be supplied within 48 hours or 2 working business days to a person who requests it. So there's a very short time frame for nursing home records to be supplied.
Do you generally find that a person at the end of a treatment, let us assume the individual and their family think service was fine, treatment was fine, do you find them asking for medical records, or is it generally a request made when a family or an individual feels that the quality of service was less than what they expected?
Well, it can be under a couple of circumstances that an individual would want records. Say you want to start going to a new doctor, you might request a copy of your chart to bring to your new doctor, and that's a reasonable request. But when there's been a bad outcome, that's when family members tend to want to look at the medical record to see if they can decipher what happened.
Do you find that whether it's hospitals or nursing homes or individual physicians or nurses or any other healthcare provider, when they get a request for medical records, how do they generally, what's your experience in terms of how they look at that request? Do they look with suspicion and worry on the request, or do they do, well, I guess I have to comply with this, and they comply with it? What is the general prevailing attitude? Is it, wow, once they get it, they're like on notice about, gee, I wonder what the motivation of the individual is? How does that work?
I think it might be a cause for concern more in a physician's office when the doctor knows that the patient was unhappy with care and is going to see somebody else. When family members ask for hospital records, it may stimulate a notice in the risk manager's office to take a look at the chart to see what happened here, why would the family be asking for the records. It's more common for people to ask for their doctor's office records than it is for a hospital chart.
Why is that?
Because of the reason of going to see a new practitioner, or they're moving out of the area, they need a copy of their chart.
You are a professional and trained at looking at medical records and being able to pick up inconsistencies, alterations, or whatever the case may be. What would be your judgment with regard to how efficient a lay person may be that's looking at medical records after they may have obtained them? And let's assume they may be unhappy with the outcome, so that they're looking at it with some cautious eye.
Healthcare professionals use their own set of abbreviations, their own language. I think it's extraordinarily difficult for lay people to read medical records. With a medical background, I can look at a sentence and I can look at an abbreviation and figure out what that abbreviation means because of the words around it. But there's a lot of abbreviations and charts that are not clear to people without a medical background. So I think it would be frustrating, although not impossible, but certainly very difficult to interpret medical records if you didn't have a healthcare background.
I think we've all gone to visit or been patients in a hospital setting, and we see that the nurses stationed there, the doctors are there doing their medical reports and other things, generally geographically in the center of the floor, as the case may be. How are those medical records organized, both in terms of, let's say, a hospital? Is it any different between a hospital and a nursing home?
Well, the hospital records are usually divided into sections, so all the nurses' notes are kept together, and they should be organized so that when the record is received by the attorney or by the family, that the first nurse's note is on the top. But what often happens is that the copy machines spit out the pages in reverse order, so that there's a lot of jumbling of information. In order to make a meaningful analysis of the records, a legal nurse consultant, first step is to put the records in order so that they can be evaluated in a logical sequence.
If you were to make a sort of a general evaluation between a doctor's office, a hospital facility, and a nursing home, how would you rate them in terms of, generally speaking, the quality of how medical records are kept?
I think there's a lot of variation in physician office records, from the beautifully typed, dictated, and transcribed office note that any person can read to the almost illegible scrawl. Some physicians have handwriting that's challenging to interpret. Nursing home records can be very lengthy, particularly if a resident has been there for years and years. There's a lot of documentation. In fact, in all of healthcare, there's a lot of focus on putting information down on paper, and it just generates volumes of paper. It consumes a lot of time.
Generally speaking, in a personal injury case, how do you see medical records being used generally?
They're used, first of all, to figure out what the patient complained of after the injury, what part of the body was injured. Are those complaints consistent? Sometimes the records will state, the emergency room record will state that the patient was unrestrained, but later on in the course of treatment, the patient may claim to have been wearing a seatbelt at the time of the accident. There are sometimes histories of prior injuries, prior surgeries, and sometimes people forget to tell their attorneys about those prior surgeries, but they're generally very honest and open with healthcare practitioners and said, yes, I had a cervical laminectomy in 1999. And then the medical records are used to document the course of treatment, what type of prescriptions were administered. Very important is to look at the physical therapy records to see if the individual was compliant and showed up for treatment, because sometimes people don't participate in the treatment the way that they're supposed to.
I guess a final but important question is how common do you think tampering with medical records is?
I think what we find is really the tip of the iceberg. No one knows for sure, because there's tampering that is never detected because there's never a lawsuit and nothing ever results. I think people sometimes tamper with records because they're frightened and they don't understand the implications of it. So the actual numbers are hard to determine. The impact when it is detected is enormous, because it's very difficult to put a chart like that in front of a jury and ask the jury to please feel sympathetic to the doctors or nurses who have altered the records.
Do you find the altering issue, if it appears to be that on the surface of the medical records, to be a very powerful with a jury based on your own experience?
Oh, absolutely. The jury believes that people should keep accurate, honest records, and anything but that makes it look like they're trying to hide something.
Kat, thanks very much. We've only scratched the surface, so we'll continue this at another time. We've spoken with Pat Iyer on the issue of medical records, life and death in a lawsuit, and as a legal nurse consultant, we appreciate your very professional thoughts, and we'll be right back here on The Common Law. We appreciate you being part of The Common Law. Our website, which you'll see right there, you can click on and find out what some of our future shows and also exactly where to find us on the system in your neighborhood. So please take a second to do that. This is John Dearie. Thank you very, very much for being part of The Common Law. See you next week. So long now.